In today's episode, we'll be talking about my personal story, so stay tuned if you'd like to find out why I got kicked for my accent, how I passed a counterterrorism unit test, and also how I ended up in a steel business even though I graduated as an armament designer. Life for me started in South Africa in the early 80s, although even though I was born there, I don't necessarily have South African parents. My parents are both Polish and they migrated there because South Africa was in desperate need of doctors. Now, they graduated in Poland, they managed to escape the Iron Curtain, so they ended up in Paris. They applied for a job there, they tried Canada, they tried Sweden, where they happened to be during summer holidays as students. But someone hinted them that South Africa is looking for doctors. So they applied, and indeed they got accepted. They were assisted with the move, and once they got there, I was born shortly after. Now, living in South Africa was wonderful. I really have fond memories, probably as many people have with their childhood. You kind of isolated from the real political aspects and economical, but I must say that it was a wonderful time. The weather is obviously great. There are so many places to see in South Africa itself. We had a swimming pool. We had 4 different cars and a motorboat. So one could say kind of living the dream. Unfortunately, all of this came to a stop, an immediate stop, when the political situation changed, and unfortunately, we as Poles were on the receiving end. There was this situation where a Pole called Janusz Waluś killed the chief of the ANC party, and the whole Polish community was basically threatened. Now, for us, it was much worse because my dad, he didn't care about the color of skin and the politics per se, and he set up his medical clinic in one of the enclaves in Bophuthatswana. So he basically served the black community. He dedicated his time and knowledge to helping that part of the society. But unfortunately, it didn't help in him being threatened, so we had to basically leave at very short notice. Now, it was early 90s and Poland was actually rebounding from the dark days of being under the communism helm. So they made a decision to go back to Poland, and luckily they were quite wise in their spending during university, so they built a house out of the savings they made by working in Sweden. Therefore, we had a home to go back to. Although when we moved, it was the end of a term, a school term, so I was put at a school outside of Warsaw, Warsaw being the capital of Poland. And when I started school there, it was a bit of a shock. The reason behind that is because in South Africa I was not exposed to bullying at all. It was almost like non-existent. There were not so good behaved pupils, but that's about it. Like there was no real bullying. Whereas when I got back to Poland, literally on the first day, the first break, let alone the whole shock of being in a different country and all of that, but one of the older pupils from a sort of older, higher class, he kind of walked up to me. The kind of message spread around the school that there's this newcomer from abroad, and obviously my accent was slightly different. Yes, we did speak Polish at home, but my first language was English, therefore my Polish wasn't really up to speed. So he asked me like a question or two and realized that my Polish is different, and he stood slightly back and kicked me as hard as he can in my thigh. I was gobsmacked, like, what was this? Like, what the hell just happened? For no reason, I was treated that way, and I immediately knew that living in Poland is different. So I had to realize that Poland had a completely different kind of approach when it came to bullying. It was kind of the norm. There were various groups forming and so on. So I had to quickly either realize what's going on or sort of remain on the receiving end. So I kind of figured out the dynamics of the society, and surprisingly, I became good friends with most of the bullies. Now, that's a thing I realized as well in life, that I actually make friends with everyone, regardless of where they come from in terms of the society. So at school, I was friends with all the posh students, the well performers, and also with the bullies, the ones that were non-conformant at all. And actually, I found the latter more fun. There was always something funny happening. There was some naughty stuff going on, but I just felt better in their environment. Now, this was quite odd because as a student, as a pupil, I was always very good. I was either right at the top or somewhere close, as in one of the best at my class or at the whole school. So my position, one could say, was closer to the bullies, but my education was always spot on. And that continued, and I must say that that is a pattern of my life at university, and then even in the working environment, in running business. I'm always somewhere at the top. I like to learn, I must say, but I also really enjoy talking to people from all walks of life, and that is, I find very enriching. So that was the shock I encountered, being kicked for the way I sounded. Then people, or pupils, sorry, they kind of made fun about my Polish. So they asked me to say this word and then say that word, and it was very funny to them. And bear in mind that Poland was very, very isolated. So I was a foreigner to them, and they asked me about bananas, about pineapples, all of these things, believe it or not, just were not possible to get in Poland in the early 90s, and obviously throughout the 70s and 80s. So they didn't know it, and I was kind of like a window to the rest of the world. So they really asked me, what is it like outside of Poland? So that was, I must say, fascinating for me, like being this kind of bearer of good news and spreading my experiences, basically. Even things like Mickey Mouse, like children in Poland didn't know about it, about the existence of it. They maybe heard it somewhere. It was sort of becoming to surface back then, but I had like proper insights as to what those stories were all about. So then we moved schools closer to where my proper home was. Again, the same pattern. I made friends with bullies, but I was also good friends with the well-educated end, and I outperformed most of them, I must say. And I must say, I really enjoyed primary school. I then went to high school, although there was a bit of a situation in our family, because unfortunately my parents got divorced. Now, I hope you haven't experienced it. If you had, then you probably know how difficult it is to find yourself as a child, as to who do you want to live with. Unfortunately, I was put in that situation, and without going into details, but this meant that one of my parents didn't accept my choice, and that caused a lot of grief, which continues, well, probably until this day. So it's a very, very difficult position for any child, even though I was probably around 13. But it's something that no matter what age you are, you really lose trust in partnerships, in friendships, actually, and also in marriage. So if you can avoid it for your children, please do. But obviously, it's your call. Nevertheless, this meant that I had to mature almost overnight. There was lots of turmoil, and I basically thought, well, fine. And to be honest, I was actually excited. I kind of felt that my maturity has sped up. Like, I don't have to wait until I'm 18. At the age of 13, I already have to live an adult's life, which was great. I really enjoyed it. I only got pocket money. I had to buy my own food. I had to make my own food and also look after my clothing. And I was almost left alone in terms of school. But because of all the priming I had as a kid with well-educated parents, they didn't have to sort of micromanage me. I myself wanted to outperform everyone. I always aimed at very good grades. And that's probably the competitive side of me that luckily kicked in then. And instead of going down the wrong path, I managed to stay, one could say, on the right side. So that continued for some time. For me, like I said, it was great. I then was sent to a high school, quite a posh one, I must say. But there was a bully that was 2 years older than we were. And he either punched one of us, and there were three of us, punched one of us, or kicked or pushed someone, until the three of us said, enough is enough. And we decided to provide justice. We met up one day before school, waited for him, and when he was passing by, we basically attacked him and beaten him up. Now, unfortunately, the head teacher happened to pass by. He saw all of it, and the three of us were expelled from school at very, very short notice. For me, it was a bit of a disaster because I had this stable school to go to, whereas because of my poor behavior, no other school would accept me. So the only place I could go to was a place where my aunt used to work, which was a boys' Catholic school. Now, in the UK, this is quite common to have religious schools and also the split between boys and girls, whereas in Poland, I'm pretty sure that was the only boys' school, let alone Catholic. So imagine me making bonds with bullies and enjoying the fun that they always have when you're around them, suddenly being thrown into this bunch of well-behaved boys, boring and dull as it gets. So I never actually made proper friends there. Yes, I got on well with everyone, but my sort of friend zone was outside of it. And that was when I started to sort of move towards the military side of things. I joined a paramilitary group for youngsters, and that kind of became my way of living. I then realized that there's something special about the military that attracts me massively. Might be the order, it might be the fact that some commands are silly, but they're kind of clever in their silliness, if you know what I mean. And that is exactly what I liked about the bullies. They had always very strong rules among each other, but on the other hand, they loved having fun. So that is what I found in kind of the military part of the society, and that really, really appealed to me. So I became very dedicated, a lot of training throughout the week, and then weekend spent in the woods or shooting range. So I was really focused on that aspect. Now, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, because my parents always pushed for us, me and my siblings, to do well in life, we always pushed down the professional route. So my kind of childhood hobby and passion is aviation, and that kind of became the, let's say, cover-up story. I always told my parents I want to be a pilot, and to be quite fair, back then, before I joined the paramilitary group, that is actually what I thought I'll become, a pilot. So when I was sort of nearing the end of high school, my dad arranged a meeting with a professional pilot with kind of like 20 years of experience. And he basically said, look, young man, today's flying is more about operating a computer than it is proper hands-on flying. So if you want to do anything good to the aviation industry, you should become an aeronautical engineer rather than a pilot. So suddenly, this kind of dream or this plan for my life was almost like taken away from me. Like, who am I to question two older men, one of them being my dad and the other one a professional pilot? So I followed through, and when I went to university, I went for aeronautical engineering. It's the best technology university in Poland, and me being as competitive as I am, I chose the most difficult faculty, which is the Faculty of Power and Aeronautical Engineering. On top of it, when it came to choosing your route, I chose the most difficult one, which is applied mechanics. And that's my personality, which I obviously can't fight, but I sometimes find annoying that I always raise the stakes so high. I will achieve it, but then I think, well, why am I bothering? Why didn't I just go for something easier? But that is who I am. I know myself too well by now, and I kind of smile at it, but that's how I am. Nevertheless, I went to university. Again, the same pattern. I was very good. I wasn't the top performer because there were others who spent just too much time learning, in my opinion. But I was very practical. Whatever we learned, I was able to relate to practical solutions. Whereas I remember talking to the top performing students and they didn't have a clue about what they were going to use the equations for. So I could ask them about, let's say, differential equations, like, okay, fine, I know you can do them very quickly and so on, but how would you use them? And like, we don't know. And I luckily had that insight. I was always curious as to what is the practical use of whatever we're learning. So that gave me a really big advantage. I'm pretty sure that's the difference between where we are now. I managed to build a very successful business, whereas they are, and I know some of them, they work for sort of research institutions. So they doing what they love doing. Don't get me wrong, but that definitely would not have been my path. So at university, the pattern continued. I did a lot of military stuff. I was preparing myself subconsciously to join the army. I kind of made a decision that I don't really fit in the aviation industry because it was a bit of a shock, I must say. I managed to get a place for an apprenticeship at GE Aviation Engines. It is the place to go. It is the place that most students want to end up, but it is restricted to only the best performing students. So luckily I managed to secure a place there. I was over the moon. I joined them and initially obviously excited. My excitement levels were at 200%. I was given this task for my 6 weeks there, which sounded fascinating. It was the wear and tear of surfaces with different coatings because they had a problem that one of the parts inside the engine was just wearing too fast. So they had a lot of laboratory tests done, and I had to do the linear regression of that data and work out a pattern and finally conclude which material coating couple works the best. So I started off. After work, I went back to university, to the library to learn more about everything I was involved in. I was super, super excited. And then one day, I sifted through the data and spotted a few mistakes. Now, the mistakes were obvious because it was a positive and negative sign mistake. The samples were weighed before the experiment and after, but and then in some rows, the weights after were more than before. Now, this is technically possible if you have corrosion, so a material reacting with oxygen, therefore gaining weight, but it just did not fit the trend. So the trend was, let's say, a straight line going up, and then suddenly there was this one point that was almost would have fitted in between, sort of interpolate between the previous point and the next one, but happened to be with a negative sign, so on the other side of the axis. So this was an obvious mistake. I raised this issue with my manager, and he just looked at it and said, yeah, you're right. But you know what? By the time we're going to rectify these lab results, your 6 weeks is going to elapse. Therefore, just carry on with this wrong data. And in that moment, my levels of passion dropped from 200% to 0. I just couldn't be bothered to work on it. I did the bare minimum of what was asked for. It was terrible. On top of it, because of my dual nationality, my Polish and South African citizenship, I was not allowed to work with other engineers. So I had this small room and I was only allowed to go to the toilet and a kitchen. So I felt isolated and having to work on data that was just trash. So unfortunately, from a very sort of high achieving candidate, someone who would probably be a superstar in the company, I was just so demotivated that I was just counting days and hours until this apprenticeship ended. And then the other thing I learned there was that when you work for a large corporation, you almost mean nothing. Like you're so small that your work won't ever make a difference in the world. People won't even notice your existence. And that is something that really helped me later on in life, which I'll talk about a bit later. So that was university for me. I then started thinking seriously about joining the army, and in Poland, in order to join an army, the army as an officer, you have to have a master's degree. Which fine, that's okay. So I first finished my design engineer program. So I was a qualified engineer, and my thesis back then was the dynamics of a supersonic laser guided rocket for anti-tank use. So it was already sort of going towards military, and that I really found fascinating. Bear in mind that I did a lot of training. I did a lot of like skydiving and mountaineering, rope work, a lot of drills, a lot of shooting, a lot of martial arts, a lot of kind of physical fitness training. So I was really preparing myself for selection, proper selection. And bear in mind that because I aim always high, guess where I was aiming in the army? Yes, special forces. So then suddenly there was this advertisement within people, let's say within the known, and our paramilitary group was one of them, where the Central Police Unit in Poland, the counterterrorism unit, was looking for candidates. It was the first time they've opened their doors for civilians, and I just thought, wow, like let's give it a go. Now, I didn't necessarily want to join the police, but counterterrorism unit, fine, let's do that. And that was an interesting experience, I must say, because on day one I turned up and I opened the doors for everyone was sat, and immediately in that moment I paused and I wanted to step back and run away. Why? Well, because I saw the other candidates. I was quite skinny. I mean, don't get me wrong, I was properly built. I had very good fitness, but the people inside, like they were proper bodybuilders. They looked like bears. I mean, they were like on steroids, and in fact they were. But I just thought, well, oh my God, like probably they are the ones they're looking for, and not me, the skinny guy. But I just thought, on the other hand, well, this is not really where I want to be because I want to be in the military, so why not just give it a go? And so I forced myself into the room. I checked myself out from on the list, and then we were called out. And the first exercise was climbing a 5-meter rope without the use of your legs. Now, I did a lot of training, so I knew that this is going to be an easy thing. And first of all was this big ginger guy. He was called up first. He made his way to the rope. He grabbed hold of it firmly in his massive arms. And on the sign go, he started pulling the rope, but surprisingly his hands were moving, but his body didn't move an inch. So what he ended up doing was slipping his hands on that rope, and it's a manila rope, and after literally a few seconds, his hands were covered in blood. It's literally the first time I saw someone just damaging their hands, like the skin just peeled off immediately, covered with blood. So he was a write-off, sent back home. Then there was someone else, same story, couldn't lift his big steroid body. Then there was a third guy, exactly the same story. Maybe not as bad in terms of the damage to their hands, but crossed off straight away. Then was my turn. So I went over to the rope, grabbed firm, and on the sign go, I climbed up, I climbed down, climbed up again, climbed down, and I just thought, well, this is going to be a long selection process, so I better just to do two, knowing that the others have already failed. And believe it or not, but out of the 18 on that day, only 3 of us made it. All these stereotype bodies were rejected straight away on that single exercise. So they obviously knew exactly what is going to happen, and that's why they brought forward this exercise as the first test. And there were 3 of us left on that day. We had a full day of exercises, and I truly loved it. I know it was a selection test, but I just loved the obstacle courses, the ropes, the jumping over various like trenches and crawling and pull-ups and sit-ups and all of that, let alone the fact that when you did the full 1 round, even though they pretended they measured it, they're like, okay, fine, that was a practice run. Now the next one is your real one. So they were trying to trick you, not only physically, but psychologically at every step. Then there was a running test, a water diving test, and so it was proper full-on test today, which all 3 of us really performed well. I must say I was again the top performer there, but that's because of my dedication. I was really, when I'm on to something, I'm really serious about it, and back then my physical fitness was right up there. So then we were invited for like this full-on week worth of selection. It was very hard, but again, I just felt like in heaven. I just loved every aspect of it. Jumping out of helicopters into lakes and all the crazy stuff we were doing, the shooting, long, short rifles, whatever we did, I just felt like in heaven. And I knew that this is my place. I just loved the banter. I loved the hierarchy. I just loved everything about it. So because I passed this exam, I actually cancelled my master's degree. I thought, okay, fine, I'm going actually on a detour here, but I'm invited to this counterterrorism unit, so why not give it a go? And unfortunately, during the summer holidays, when I already changed my plans, there was this massive incident where 2 people from that unit got killed in one of their actions. And unfortunately, the minister responsible for those units made a very kind of bold decision that actually we are not going to allow civvies into special units. So I was informed and I was told that I've got a space there, but I'll have to go down the normal police route. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm not doing supersonic guided anti-tank missiles only to then sort of walk the streets as a policeman. So I was like, no, fine, I'm going to go back to university. And indeed, I continued with my master's. This time it was about armament design. Again, I loved it, or every aspect of it. And my final thesis for the master's was designing a recoilless launcher for firing water projectiles, and this was obviously for counterterrorism use for suspicious packages. And the whole recoilless gun would have been installed on a robot. So that was my kind of education, and obviously I needed the master's to apply to become an officer. So the next thing I did, I applied. Now, unknowingly to me, one of the most important criteria for becoming an officer in Poland is to have a sole Polish citizenship. So unfortunately, my application was rejected on the basis of having dual nationality. And that is when my whole life turned upside down. I did not have plan B. That was it. I was aiming only for that one thing. And here I am told that at no fault of my own, because I didn't choose to have dual nationality, I was born with it. Unfortunately, I can't be accepted. And I literally didn't know what to do with myself. Like, I knew I don't want to join the corporate world. I was rejected from the army. So what am I going to do? So what I did is I packed up and I moved to the UK in 2007. Now, this was a big trend back then in Poland because the borders have opened, and obviously Great Britain was in a much better place economically. The exchange rate was very favorable. So a lot of young Polish people have moved to the UK to sort of start their new lives. And I happened to join them, not out of necessarily choice, but almost I was left with no other idea. The only thing I was thinking of was that, well, if the army can't accept me because of my nationality, what I can do is impress them with my qualifications. So even though I was doing a lot of skydiving and shooting and all of that, I never really bothered to have any certificates for it. But now I realize that actually for a formal application process, that is what you need. Like, you know what you can do, but they don't. They treat you as just a normal old citizen. So I had to have a lot of certificates, and I went over the top. I really wanted to sort of swamp them with all these certificates. So the first 2 years in the UK, I was lucky enough to work as a design engineer for a small engineering company in London. But at the same time, every weekend and sometimes in the afternoons, I did something towards getting qualifications. One of them was going to Spain to get more qualifications for skydiving, then some mountaineering, winter mountaineering courses, and also English. Because even though English was my first language, I didn't have a single paper that would even say that I know a word in English. So I had to go through various exams at professional level just so that I can send a full package of documents with my next application. However, knowing that my first application was rejected, I always knew at the back of my mind that I need a plan B. So when working for the engineering company, well, firstly as an engineer, I just loved that place. The company was small, but they were involved in almost every aspect of engineering. The real reason behind that was because the owners couldn't say no to any inquiry. So whatever was sent their way, we quoted for, and if we were successful, we ended up working on. Therefore, we worked on timber, wood, plastic, metal, steel, you name it, we did it basically. But then one of the things that really attracted me was structural steel. I didn't necessarily have that at university, but what I did have there was to see how other manufacturing plants work, and what I saw in the engineering company was completely different from what I got to know. In other words, I was shocked at how outdated the steel manufacturing process was, and it turned out that that is the norm. Like, this is how the whole industry operates. So I was like, okay, I just felt drawn into making a difference. I just knew that I can do a much better job at it. And there was this one situation that really changed my approach and was a big trigger to how my life then continued. So there was this situation where I was dealing with a customer for a steel project, and I promised him a delivery. Let's say it was a Wednesday. Now the timing was crucial because we had only one day left. We only had the Tuesday to fabricate everything, and there was a lot to work on. Now this was all doable. I knew it would have been possible to do it, but the time frame was really short. So I went downstairs to the production floor. I quickly sort of grabbed the people that were working on this project, this kind of stand-up huddle, and I said, guys, like, we really have to deliver this by tomorrow afternoon. I promised it to the customer, and let's show that we stand for reliability. Let's make it all happen. And I couldn't believe the effect of that speech myself, but the boys were really running. They didn't walk across the production floor, they were running. They were proving a point that they can deliver. The owners of the business just couldn't believe what was happening. They asked me, like, what did you tell them? And I said, nothing. I just said, well, we have to finish this order. And in true fairness, I didn't offer them anything. I didn't even offer like a pint of beer at the end of it. It was just, guys, let's just show that we matter, that we can make a difference. And that really resonated with them, obviously. And they made it work. Like they spent all that time working really hard, and finally the project was ready to be delivered. It was a Wednesday afternoon. They quickly ran up to me and said, Michael, as requested, it's ready. And they also said it's loaded. So everything was ready to go. So I went over to the driver. I said, dear driver, this project is ready to go. He was sitting behind a computer. He was bored, as he usually was. And he just slowly raised his arm on which he had his watch, looked at it, and then slowly put his hand down. I said, no, it's too late. I won't get back on time before our work finishes. I'm like, okay, I understand, but like, this is a one-off, like this is a special thing. I've agreed it with our customer. He's waiting there. He's got people on site ready to offload the steel. Like, no, I'm not going. And I couldn't believe it. I went over to the directors, not because I wanted to be the snitcher, but it's just because I wanted to make this all happen. Like, a promise for me means so much that I'll do everything it takes to make it happen. So I went over to them. I said, look, this is the situation. The guys have worked, as you know, very hard. They've loaded everything. Yes, the driver won't be able to come back by 5 p.m. because that is when we finish, but a promise is a promise and we have to deliver it. So the owners went over to the driver, asked him if he could deliver it. He just shook his head, saying no. And the owners, believe it or not, were helpless. And they said, no, sorry, Michael, it is what it is. He doesn't want to go. We won't deliver. I'm like, you must be joking. Give me the keys. And I grabbed the keys. I jumped into the van. It was the first time I was driving a big vehicle like this through narrow roads in London. But a promise is a promise. And I could not be the face of letting the customer down. So if I've agreed something, that will happen. And I then realized later in life that keeping to your promise is actually probably one of the best advice you can give to anyone in business to succeed. If you make a promise and you're able to stick with it, you will have more and more customers. Nevertheless, that really made me thinking, like, okay, I care more about our customers than the owners of the business. I'm like, okay, now on top of it, I could make a much better job at it, not only in terms of reliability, but also in terms of project management. Because there, the only way jobs were prioritized was based on the loudest shouting customer. So I knew that this can be done in a completely different way with the use of software and some project management methodologies. So at the back of my mind, I kind of had this idea forming, and it was actually my plan B. So I was working hard towards my second application, but at the meantime, I started working on my business. I started writing a business plan. It took me 9 months. I did a 5-week business startup course. I went over to Poland to learn from my grandfather, who was a professor at a university in terms of accounting. So I asked him to teach me bookkeeping, and I did everything the old style. So massive sheets of paper, debit, credit, or left and right hand side, and then I got to know the double entry method from the basics, like from pen and paper. Now fast forward a few months, I applied, and guess what? I got rejected again. But luckily this time I had a plan for myself, and that plan was to start a business. So immediately after receiving the rejection letter, I handed in my notice, and that is how I started my business on the 1st of September of 2009. Now, obviously, they tried to stop me because I was actually very good at what I did in terms of managing a lot of projects. But to me, the decision was made actually months ago, because I knew that I really want to at least try making a difference in the industry. And I must say that steel became something that I was passionate about. And I kind of connected the dots because during university I also worked on building sites, and I realized that I love putting up walls, plasterboard walls, the dry lining, but I really disliked the things that come after, which is plastering and then decorating. So I'm very good at making big things happen, and I really take pride in it. It really gives me satisfaction. But then the fine tuning of the details, that is not necessarily where I shine. So with steelwork, that is exactly the case. You start today with a blank piece of paper, and within a week or two you can build the whole structure, leaving all the fine tuning to other trades that then step in. So this became my passion, and without that passion I'm sure I wouldn't succeed in business as much as I did. Now, other than that, as a person, I like sports. I follow a lot of sports, and in terms of me myself, I do a lot of running, biking, but my main sport is orienteering. Unsurprisingly, I'm very competitive, so I'm always trying to be somewhere at the top. Obviously, I'm trying to win, but that is not always possible. I would have to dedicate even more time, which is not necessarily possible. But I really enjoy this sport and I actually really recommend you try. It is a sport where your mind is fixated on something else, therefore you don't even feel you're exercising. Like when I go for an orienteering race that lasts an hour, I don't even know when that hour's gone by. Whereas if you took me on the treadmill for an hour, I mean, after 5 minutes I would have given up. Even when I do my practice runs, and bear in mind I run 4 or 5 times a week, the hour is normally slow. I try and mix it up and so on. I do have also coaching sessions and they actually go past very quickly. That's because there's someone else to sort of make sure that you're doing what is needed for that session. Whereas on my own, when I go running, it is boring. When orienteering, though, it's a completely different dimension. Your mind is reading the map, it's trying to interpret what the map is showing and comparing it to what you're seeing. Then you have to think about the route choice, you have to think about speed. If you run too fast, you'll experience oxygen depth, therefore your thinking won't be there. Therefore, you'll start making silly mistakes and running further than the optimum route choice. So that's why there's so many variables which just make it so much more exciting. So really find out more about orienteering in your local area. There are a lot of events around the UK. Other than that, I fulfilled one of my dreams from when I was a kid because I am a pilot. I've got my own plane, which was only possible after selling my business. I've got the time and also the comfort to be able to have my own plane and fly it whenever the weather allows for it. I also have two daughters. We spend a lot of time together as a family. That's something that is very important to me because what I've realized is that you can always chase financial goals, but you only have a short period of time that you have available with your children. They only grow up once, and once they've grown up, that's it. I would have missed out on their journey. So that is why that became so important to me. The 10 years that one has available with your children, which sounds like a lot, but if you break it down to 10 summers, then suddenly it becomes a tangible measure that really keeps ticking. So that is why this is my priority, and I really want to be there for them through their sort of young life. So that is me in a nutshell. I hope you enjoyed my story. Obviously, there are lots of twists and other stuff that were going on, but they're not necessarily as important for this Scale Faster podcast, which is about business and what allowed me, or my experiences, my personality that allowed me to be passionate about business. And as you know, especially the process of standing back, where you replace yourself with systems, procedures, and a whole bunch of other things so that your company can operate like a well-oiled machine.